Currently, there is a significant lack of knowledge and awareness amongst the people, the individuals and professionals who come into contact with people with autism.
The training that GPs and other healthcare professionals receive in autism is woefully inadequate.
The usual presentation is that somebody suspects that there is a problem, and they tend to bring them to their GP because we're there and we're free, basically. And so it becomes something that, as a GP or at primary care generally, you tend to be presented with this. And of course the GP needs to be able to, if you like, try and pick through just to make sure this does look like it possibly is an autistic spectrum type problem, and needs to know within their area, be it a child or an adult, who to refer them on to.
Across the board, there is a real lack of training in diagnostic techniques, but also in the assessment of need for people with autism and Asperger's syndrome.
The support I've received from my GP has been very inadequate because they've not really understood my needs. Because I'm articulate and I can explain the types of difficulties I have, people kind of automatically assume that I'm thus able to cope with the problems that I have.
You can't possibly have Asperger's. You know, the way you put yourself across, it seems like you're a perfectly social young man.
The sort of training that will be required, say, for general practitioners like myself is probably not that much different from the sort of training that will be needed for, say, teachers, or particularly the Senko type teachers in a school, for people maybe higher up in the police force, the judiciary, other people who might come up against people with autism. It's not rocket science, it's a sort of an understanding of human nature.
Just because I can tell you what a difficulty I have is doesn't mean that I'm able to get around that difficulty. My brain is physically wired to inhibit me being able to either acquire that skill, develop that skill without any help.
So the same talk that I give to GPs, I can give exactly the same talk to teachers, and they'll understand it. It's at the same sort of level. And it would be nice to have a sort of generic training in autism that anybody can understand, rather than trying to break people down into groups and say you have a specific education system for educating GPs, and another one for nurses, another one for health visitors, another one for the police, another one for social services, because they can all be the same.
It's very important when they are coming into contact with people who ultimately are deciding whether they should have access or eligibility or support in terms of benefits or employment, that those people are making informed and intelligent decisions based on a good level of understanding of the individual's needs and their condition.
You don't need everybody to be an expert. You need everybody just to have that little bit of awareness going on up there that sparks a little light and says, well, could this be autism? And then to know where to refer to.
The benefits and employment system can be challenging for people with autism, particularly around access. That ranges from even the difficulties perhaps associated with the environment of Job Centre Plus, where due to sensory needs and very specific challenges associated with autism, people may find that environment quite difficult to cope with.
Job centres can be terribly unhelpful. A local friend of mine from in Havering, who also has Asperger's, has become completely adverse to even entering a job centre anymore, because the last time he has been in them, he's ended up in panic attacks and fits of tears.
Anybody in a job centre plus who is going to be dealing with an autistic job seeker, or who is likely to be dealing with them, whether it's on the telephone or in person, should have a half-day's awareness training.
This has greatly affected how I and others with similar conditions have been able to find any way back into work.
Unless they've had training which specifically addresses those issues and enables them to understand it and to respond appropriately, they will not. It's highly unlikely they'll be able to respond effectively to an autistic job seeker, and that job seeker in turn is likely to perceive that lack of understanding as inaccessible, as they're not going to be able to pursue a job through that route, basically.
We're not suggesting that every single personal advisor should be an expert in autism, but we feel there certainly is scope for them to perhaps recognise potential needs of people with autism by coming from an informed standpoint, and that may well be driven by the person being able to say, this is my diagnosis.
One of the challenges of trying to get and support people with autism and Asperger's syndrome into employment is to recognise that a significant amount of effort and support is required pre-employment.
If you're at college and you're a teenager, you get a Saturday job, you know, or you get an evening job. If you've got a learning disability or autism, that's not top of people's agendas, but it should be, because it's about bringing normal life into the lives of people, whatever their disability.
You have to tell people this person is on the autistic spectrum. This is the conditions that are appropriate for them. These are the conditions that are not appropriate.
Most employers are very open to making the reasonable adjustments that are required of them, and their attitude tends to be, okay, well, tell us what we need to do and we'll try to adapt, and many of them do.
It's hugely important to create a supportive culture for everyone in the business, and people with AS are no exception. One of the key things that we've created is a Working with Asperger's Syndrome fact sheet. We created it in partnership with prospects, and they did say it was one of the best fact sheets they'd seen on the subject.
I would definitely benefited from more support if they'd understood what the characteristics of AS. So it would have just made things so much more easier and self-explanatory as well. I wouldn't have had to explain myself.
I really don't want to try to mystify this or overcomplicate it. It really isn't difficult to accommodate an autistic person in the workplace. A lot of it boils down to common sense and common decency.
They're well able to do a job of work, and they're constantly rejected because they cannot interview properly, or they may get into a job but it's not structured properly for them, and they lose their job and they never get another one. You know, you can imagine the effect that has on confidence, and confidence is a critical thing.
We come with them. We come with them at the interview. We come with them in the job, and we train people in the job. So the employer hasn't got to do that. If at the end of that time the person, it's not worked out, we will just move that person and take them to another opportunity. We wouldn't leave somebody in a job where it's obviously not working out for the employer or the individual.
One of our employees, Sarah Hewitt, has set up an autism spectrum disorder SharePoint, which is now being used by employees with ASD and with friends and family to share knowledge and to gain contacts with each other, talk to each other.
It's becoming more and more common now not to have to even explain what Asperger's syndrome is to somebody, whereas I think 5 years ago, when I was diagnosed, people didn't really know about it. So I think something is working.
Sometimes someone gets themselves a job without any help at all, which is great, but if it hasn't been worked out, there can be problems further down the line, and sometimes we get called in because it can be as bad as a disciplinary or a grievance procedure, but with just a little bit of help from us, actually that can often be sorted out, and then we can keep that job going longer term.
I was too slow packing the shopping. Because that job involved packing shopping, taking shopping across the road, and I think it was clumsiness why I couldn't pack it fast enough, kind of dyspraxia, and the DEA said I'm not losing the job because it's social school, so it's got nothing to do with autism.
First impressions count, and a lot of people unfortunately judge, and so that's where, and so autistic people fall into that trap by being so honest and being themselves that they the employee has conjured up all these sort of connotations, all these judgments, and they just don't get the job. So I've had to act my way into the job.
We've had someone recently who's been going to a day service for 20 years, never had a job, 42 years of age. He's just got a job in a high street cafe. He's absolutely loving it, and he's a changed person. He stands different, he looks more confident, he smiles. People, when he walks down the street in his hometown now, wave at him because they've seen him in this cafe. Now he's actually only working for about 6 hours a week. So it's a very small commitment. You look from an employer's point of view, and you're looking pretty minimum wage level, 6 hours a week. It's changed this individual's life, but it also brings people into the cafe and the whole community. knows this individual, whereas before he would have been locked away in a day services, excluded from the community.
They do have the capacity to become very consistent and reliable employees.
If we can do this, then there's no reason why any other organisation can't.
It's not just about the salary and the money, it's much more about being the same as everybody else, having the same opportunities.